Welcome back. In this podcast, I'll be talking about the concepts of medical terminology, which are the key points that are covered in your first chapter, but it's basically an introduction to the actual study of medical terminology. We're going to talk a little bit about the concepts of medical terminology. It's a special vocabulary that's used by healthcare providers for effective and accurate communication. It's actually used worldwide so that it's a uniform and consistent way of communicating with one another. It's based on Latin and Greek words, and as I said, it's consistent throughout the world. So we're going to talk a little bit about how the medical terminology is actually put together. First, you have a root word, and that's the fundamental unit of the medical term. And once you know what that root word means, you then can add prefixes and suffixes to those words, and that will change the meaning of the word. So when we learn about medical terminology, you need to learn prefixes, suffixes, and then the root word. And then you're golden. You'll be able to figure out what all sorts of different words mean that you may never have ever seen or heard before. I'm sure you already know that a prefix is actually the short part of a word that's at the beginning of the word. It modifies the meaning of the root of the word. And in your textbook, you'll see it that it's followed by a dash. And that way you know that it's the pre or the before, which is what pre means, part of the word. On the other hand, the suffix is the short part or the part added to the end of the word, and that modifies the meaning of the root. It's indicated in your textbook by a dash, and an example of one is here, itis, which means inflammation of, but that is what's added to the root, and then that will modify its meaning. So this is just a cartoon, if you will, or a diagram of what we're talking about when you want to put together a medical term. You put the prefix in front of the root, added by the suffix. Sometimes they don't have a prefix and a suffix, but once you put all those pieces of the puzzle together, you actually have your word. Or you can take a word and deconstruct it to figure out what the root is. Now you know what you're talking about as far as the big picture or the body part. And then as you know or begin to learn those prefixes, you'll have a better idea of what the word is, what the topic is, and if it has a suffix, you'll have a better idea of what the whole word means. Sometimes over the course of this course or in working in the medical field, you may forget what some of the parts of the word mean. But if you can remember any part of the word, you kind of have a big kind of a concept of what this word might mean. So here's an example of how a word is put together. So if the word is learn, you put a suffix on it, er, and now it becomes one who learns. If you put the re, switching the er around, and you put that in front of the word, so it becomes the prefix of the word, now you have relearn, so someone who needs to learn again. The Greek word for heart is cardia, spelled with a K. Typically, we use the word cardia with a C. So the root for heart is cardi, and then you would then add a suffix to that to get another word. The Latin word for lung is pneumo. And then that root word becomes pneum. Then we would add a suffix onto that, and now we may put OLOGY, so the study of the lung would be pneumology. So now we're going to talk about how we start to form or combine words together. So the root you can see here in this diagram or a puzzle. You put the O or a vowel in between the root and the suffix, and now you begin to form the next word. So now let's look at how we can form or combine words. So the root is shown with a combining vowel, and if it does have that combining vowel, it's called a combining form. So in your textbook, you'll notice that there'll be a slash after the root and then the vowel. So that's called the root. And then one example is neuro. You can see ner slash o. So when you write the word in real life, you don't have that slash there. This is just demonstrating to you how a word is put together. Neuro is what we use for the central nervous system, nerves, etc. So the combining vowel is omitted if the suffix has a vowel already. So in this case, we're saying neuritis, inflammation of a nerve, and you can see that itis, I-T-I-S, has a vowel, so you drop the O. But in other words, in different words that you form, you will usually have the O there, depending on the suffix that you use. Again, here's that diagram which demonstrates you put the root with the O and the suffix and you form the word. So a few more examples of combining forms. As I mentioned, you insert the O before the suffix, but in the case of a suffix that starts with a consonant, then you would add the O. So, I mentioned this before, ology, O-L-G-Y, is a suffix that means the study of. So, ner is nerves or the nervous system. You put the two together with a combining O and you have neurology, the study of the nervous system. So it becomes really important to start paying attention to the phonetic assistance that you're given in your textbook on how you need to pronounce each word. Repeat the words aloud, trying to get it correct. Pronunciation may change depending on the parts that are combined with the root word. And if you have forgotten from your basic English what a long vowel is, what a short sound is, then pay attention to those phonetic guides and relearn those a little bit so it'll help you with trying to pronounce these words. Sometimes it gets kind of tricky when you're trying to learn how to pronounce these medical terms, especially when letters are silent. And especially when they start at the beginning of the word. So some examples of those are things like pneumonia, and that's pronounced with the N and the P is silent. Another word where the P is silent is pseudonym. It sounds like an S. So you can see that it becomes really important to look at those phonetic helpers. So also in many of your chapters, you're going to find abbreviations. And we all like abbreviations because they help us save time when we communicate with one another, whether it be in writing or verbally. But we need to be aware that they are subject to error, and especially when we're talking about the medical field. Different areas of specialty tend to have their own abbreviations, and they don't always mean the same thing when you cross from one specialty to another. So it becomes really important to know what is acceptable terminology for abbreviations in this area and what is acceptable in yet another area. And sometimes don't use them at all because you may not be talking about the right thing. So beware of symbols for the same reasons. Things like right and left, we still use those today in written communication in the medical records, but you always put it with a circle around it and you use a capital letter. But we've been told that we need to avoid using arrows to mean increase, and I believe they're on the do not use list anymore. So again, be sure that you're using symbols that are acceptable. And let's face it, almost everything's going towards the computer these days. In fact, we have to go that way. We think that it's going to be safer because handwriting is difficult to understand. Not everybody writes clearly. And in order to try to make sure that the communication is as accurate as possible, because patients' lives are at stake when we don't communicate well. So in order to be more accurate, we're going all to the computer-generated communication. So we're seeing less and less symbols used in communications these days. So once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this podcast, and I hope you enjoy the course as much as I did the very first time I took my medical terminology course. And as with anything in life, you will get as much out of this course as you put into this course. If you need additional assistance, you can email me, and I'll be glad to return your email as quickly as I can, hopefully within 24 hours or less. Thank you, and this is Susan Knowles with Cochise College.